Hello, my friends, and welcome to The Secret Garden, chapters 13, 14, and 15. Let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 13, A Mysterious Boy. That's a picture of a thrush nesting, Martha said when Mary showed her the note. Then Mary understood. The garden was a nest, and she was like a thrush. Dickon would keep their secret. She looked forward to seeing Dickon the next day, but during the night she awoke to the sound of rain beating at her window and the wind roaring. She sat up in bed, feeling angry. The weather is as contrary as I am. She tossed and turned for about an hour. Then she heard something fretful. She sat up again and listened. It wasn't the wind, it was crying. Mary made up her mind to find out who it was. She got out of bed and put on her robe and slippers. She lighted a candle and headed down the long, dark hallway. Mary was too excited to be afraid. She remembered the way the door behind the tapestry where Mrs. Medlock had been so angry to find her. The crying grew louder as she approached it, down some passages and up a few steps. She pushed the tapestry aside and opened the hidden door. The crying was clearer now. She saw a faint light under another door and went in. She found herself inside a big room with handsome furniture and a hearth fire. A candle flickered on the table beside a big four-poster bed. On it lay a boy crying pitifully. She crept forward. Her bright candle attracted the boy's attention. "Are you a ghost?" he asked in a half-frightened voice. "No," Mary whispered. "Are you?" He stared at her with big gray eyes that looked too large for his thin face. "I'm calling Craven," the boy said. "I'm Mary Lennox. Mr. Craven's my uncle." "He's my father," the boy said. Mary was stunned. "No one told me he had a boy," she gasped. "Come closer," Colin said. He put out his hand and touched her. "You are real," he said softly. "I thought you were one of my dreams." Colin sat up. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "My room. Didn't anyone tell you that I live here?" "They wouldn't dare," he said. "They know that I won't let people see me." "Why not?" Mary asked. "Because I'm ill. I was born too soon, and if I live, I'll probably be a hunchback. But I probably won't. I don't like people to see me and talk about me. My father only comes when I'm asleep. He doesn't want to see me either." "Why not?" Mary asked. It was all such a mystery. "My mother died when I was born. He doesn't think I know, but I hear people talking. He almost hates me and wishes I were dead." "Don't you ever go outside?" she inquired. "Never. I used to be taken to the seaside in my wheelchair, but people stared at me. I had to wear irons on my legs. A doctor from London said I needed fresh air, but I hate fresh air. I can't stand people gawking at me." Mary asked if she should go away, but Colin motioned for her to sit next to him on a big stool. He wanted to know everything about her. "Everybody here has to do what I want," he said as if it were normal. "They can't make me angry because I probably won't grow up." Then he asked, "How old are you?" "10," she said, "just like you. When you were born, your father locked the garden and buried the key." This got Colin's attention. His eyes grew larger. "What garden? Why did he lock it?" he demanded. Mary felt nervous. She thought, "He hates the garden because his wife died." Out loud, she said, "It's the garden your father hates. No one has been inside it for 10 years. Nobody is even allowed to talk about it." "I can make them talk," Colin declared. "If I were to live, Misselthwaite would be mine. They'd have to tell me." This comment scared Mary. If he asked questions, what might happen? She changed the subject. "Do you really think you won't live?" "I don't suppose I will," he replied crossly. "I don't really want to live, but I don't want to die. When I'm sick, I think about it all the time. It makes me afraid, and I cry." He paused. "But about the garden, I could make them open it." Mary twisted her hands in anguish. She cried out, "Don't do that! If they open the garden, it will spoil everything. If we could find it, if no one could go there but us, don't you see, it would be our secret." Colin lay back on his pillows. "Hmm, I've never had a secret before." "I'm sure I can find the garden," Mary went on. "Then you could go there. Maybe we could find a nice boy to push your wheelchair." "I'd like that," he said in a dreamy kind of voice. Mary felt a little safer. She began telling him about the other gardens and about Ben Weatherstaff. Colin smiled when he heard about the robin. After a while, he said, "I want to show you something." He pointed at a curtain that hung above the mantel and told Mary to pull the cord. Behind the curtain was a painting of a laughing girl. Her dark hair was tied with a blue ribbon, and her gray eyes looked just like Colin's. "That's my mother," he said with disgust. "I don't know why she had to die. If she'd lived, maybe I wouldn't be sick. Maybe my father wouldn't hate to look at me." He turned away and ordered Mary to close the curtain. "I don't like her to look at me." Again, Mary asked if she should leave. She was afraid that Mrs. Medlock might find her. "I won't allow Mrs. Medlock to be angry at you," Colin said. "I'm glad you're here, and I want this to be our secret. I'll tell Martha whenever I want to see you. She stays with me when my nurse is away." Then he said quietly, "I wish I could go to sleep before you leave." Mary pulled the footstool closer. "I can sing for you, just like my Aya used to sing for me. Just close your eyes." Mary sang him an Indian lullaby she'd learned as a baby while stroking his hand. "Mm, that is nice," Colin said as he drifted off to sleep. Mary crept away softly. Chapter 14. Colin the Rajah. Martha was very busy the next day. It was afternoon before Mary could talk to her. I found out who was crying last night, Mary said, and I went to his room. It's Colin. Martha looked red with fright. You shouldn't have done that, she said tearfully. You'll get me in trouble. It's all right, Mary said. He was glad I came. Are you sure? Martha asked. When he's angry, he screams and throws the most terrible tantrums to frighten us. He wasn't angry at me. We talked and he showed me his mother's portrait. Then I sang him to sleep. Martha was amazed. It's like you walked into the lion's den. He never lets strangers look at him. But if Mrs. Medlock finds out, she'll say I told you and she'll send me away. Colin wants it to be our secret. He wants you to tell me when I can go and see him. Mrs. Medlock will have to obey him. Then Mary asked what was wrong with Colin. Martha had calmed down a bit. She began, No one really knows. It began all wrong with his mother dying and his father raging with grief. The doctors were afraid Mr. Colin had a weak back, so they kept him lying down all the time. He had to wear an iron brace. He's very spoiled, Mary said, not realizing she had been spoiled too. Well, he's had many colds and coughs, Martha said. He's had rheumatic fever once and typhoid. Mother says all he needs is fresh air and running round, but he just lies in his room reading picture books and taking medicine. The last time he went out, he began sneezing. A new gardener looked at him, and Mr. Colin threw a terrible tantrum, yelling, He thinks I'm a hunchback! Then he cried himself into a fever. If he gets angry with me, I won't see him again, Mary said. He'll see you if he wants, Martha smiled. He always has his way. A bell rang and Martha got up. His nurse wants me to go watch him for a while, she said. I hope he's in a good temper. She returned 10 minutes later. Well, you have bewitched him, she said in amazement. He's sitting up and he wants you to come as quickly as you can. Mary hurried to Colin's room. In daylight, she saw how beautiful it was. The walls and rugs were richly colored, and the fire burned brightly. Colin's cheeks glowed in his pale face. Martha's scared, Mary told him. She thinks Mrs. Medlock will send her away if she finds out we've met. Colin frowned. Tell Martha that everyone has to do as I please, and that I will send Medlock away if she gets angry when she brings you. I'll take care of everything, said Colin regally. Mary looked at him oddly. I was just reminded of a boy I once saw in India, she began. It was a Rajah. That's a royal prince. He talked to his people just like you do. They had to do whatever he said. They might have been killed if they didn't. She paused. I was also thinking how different you are from Dickon, Martha's brother. He's 12 years old, and he can charm the birds and foxes and squirrels with his pipe, just like an Indian fakir or snake charmer. Colin was curious to hear more. Mary told him how Dickon knew all the creatures that lived on the moor. But how can he like the moor? Colin asked. It's such a dreary place. On the night I arrived, Mary said, I hated it too. But Martha talks about it, and Dickon tells me it's a beautiful place, full of living things. I wish I could see it, Colin said. "But I can't go out because I'm going to die. Everybody says so." Mary didn't like the way Colin almost boasted about dying. She said in her most contrary way, "If everybody wished me to die, then I wouldn't do it. Besides, I don't believe everybody thinks you'll die. The doctor from London didn't. He made them take off the irons." "That's true," said Colin. "One time I heard him say, 'The lad might be fine if he makes up his mind. Put him in a humour to get well.'" Mary said, "Dickon could do it. He talks about living things, not about being sick and dying." Colin was enjoying himself so much that he forgot about his weak back. He sat up straight and said, "I just thought of something. Do you know we're cousins?" They were both in the mood to laugh. Suddenly Mrs. Medlock entered with Dr. Craven, a cousin of Colin's father. "What's the meaning of this?" the doctor said in alarm. In his best Rajah voice, Colin said, "This is my cousin Mary Lennox. She must be allowed to come whenever I send for her." Mrs. Medlock wailed, "Who let her come in here?" "Nobody," Colin said. "Mary heard me crying, and she came by herself." Dr. Craven sat down and took Colin's pulse. "It's fast, my boy," the doctor said. "Excitement is not good for you." "I will get more excited if she doesn't visit me," Colin said, staring at the doctor. "She makes me feel better. I want her to stay for tea." He commanded Mrs. Medlock to bring some tea and snacks. She hurried off to carry out his order. The doctor finally agreed to let Mary stay. He also left, shaking his head in disapproval. When Mrs. Medlock brought their refreshments, Colin helped himself to a hot muffin and offered one to Mary. He said, "Now, tell me all about Rajahs." Chapter 15. Nest Building. It rained for a whole week. Mary missed going to the garden and seeing Dickon, but she and Colin spent hours talking, playing games, and reading to each other. He hadn't had a crying fit since he met Mary. Mary was very cautious about talking to Colin of the secret garden in case he couldn't keep a secret. But how could they get him there without anybody knowing? She was sure the garden would help him get better as it had helped her. At the end of the week, Mary woke up very early. Outside, the sky was blue again. She jumped out of bed and ran to open her window. A sweet, fresh breeze greeted her. She put her hand out the window to feel the sun. "It's warm," she thought. "It will make the sprouts grow and the bulbs work very hard. Oh, I must see the garden now." She dressed quickly to the sound of birds singing. She hurried downstairs to a small side door she could unlock by herself. Outside, the grass had turned green, and there seemed to be living things in every bush and tree. Little shoots were sprouting in every flower bed and border. The world was waking up. She ran to the secret garden. She was about to fling open the door when she heard a strange caw, caw. Looking up, she saw a big blue-black bird on top of the ivy-covered wall. It made her nervous, and she hoped it would fly away. When she entered the garden, the crow flew to an apple tree. Under the tree was a small reddish animal with a bushy tail, and Dickon kneeling in the grass. As Mary approached, the animal went over to Dickon. The crow flew down and perched on his shoulder. Dickon introduced his companions. "This fox cub is Cap'n. The crow here is Suit. They followed me across the moor this morning." The fox and crow stayed with Dickon as he and Mary walked around the garden. They didn't seem afraid of Mary. Mary told Dickon how she had met Colin and played with him every day. "He says I make him forget about being ill and dying," she whispered. "I'm glad you know about him," Dickon whispered back. "I couldn't have told you myself." Mary was surprised. "What do people know about Colin?" "Folks know he's ill," Dickon said. "They know Mr. Craven doesn't want him talking about, and can't bear to see him if his son when he's awake. Mr. Colin reminds him of his wife." "Does Colin really want to die?" Mary asked. "No, but Mother says he wishes he'd never been born, and that's the worst thing for a child to think." Mary said softly, "Mr. Craven is afraid Colin will grow a hunchback. Colin's so afraid he almost never sits up. He feels his back for lumps. He says if he ever finds one, he'll scream himself to death." "He'll never get well if he keeps thinking like that," Dickon said, rubbing the fox's neck. "If Colin were here, he wouldn't think about finding lumps. He'd watch the buds break out and the flowers bloom. Do you think he'd be willing to come here?" "I'm sure he would," Mary said. "He knows about the garden, but not that we've found it. Maybe he'd come outside for us. He could order the gardeners and everyone to stay away. I'm certain Colin could keep a secret." Dickon smiled. "Then we'll get him out for sure." All right, my friends, that is the end of The Secret Garden, chapters 13, 14, and 15. Come back next week for the rest of the story. Bye-bye now.